Where exactly did we come from? Why do we look the way we do? Tracing the lineage of the genus Homo is a topic that has fascinated scientists and the general public for decades. And for years, scientists have worked together on piecing the puzzle to really figure out how the genus Homo arose. Now, that may seem interesting for a scientist, but why exactly is understanding the Homo genus lineage important for the general public? For starters, understanding how the form of late Homo species, including our fellow Homo sapiens, came about is crucial in helping doctors understand how to treat a sick patient. Physical therapists and chiropractors know which joints and bones lie where, and a marathon runner understand the proper way to run long distance. In order to trace the lineage of genus Homo, we need to identify the key players in this story. First off, if you were to look up early human ancestors, the big words like Ardipithecus and Australopithecus would most likely come up in your top search results. These ancestral groups are where we start our story. From there, we see how a late species of Australopithecus transitioned into the earliest forms of the genus Homo, specifically Homo habilis and Homo erectus. Although this lineage may seem cut and dry, there are still some gray areas in current knowledge, but for now, let's start with what we know. For the sake of simplicity, we will focus on two distinct derived characteristics that we will trace in our story: cephalization, which is the fancy word for increased brain capacity, and the evolution of precise movement in hands. Let's start from the beginning with a species known as Ardipithecus ramidus. Fossil evidence indicates that this extinct species dates back to around 4.51 to 4.32 million years ago. The genus Ardipithecus in general is an extinct group and a sister taxa to the common ancestral group of the genus Homo. Ardipithecus ramidus fossil evidence indicates a cranial capacity of around 300 to 350 cubic centimeters. To give a reference point, the known cranial capacity of modern humans is around 1,300 cubic centimeters. In addition, Ardipithecus ramidus had long, curved fingers in relation to thumb size, adapted for tree climbing, yet not fully adapted for precise movements other than the gripping of branches. As we move further through the evolutionary lineage to around 3.8 to 2.8 million years ago, we see an example of a species within the group from which the genus Homo descended, Australopithecus. Specifically, let's look at Australopithecus afarensis. The public may know this name from the famous fossils found of Lucy, a member of the Australopithecus afarensis species. With Lucy's fossils, we begin to see an increase in cranial capacity around 420 centimeters cubed. Fossil evidence also indicates that Lucy's hands show consistencies, with those organisms evolved from knuckle-walking species with long, curved fingers and lack of a full precision grip. Already, we can see how precision grip seems to have evolved later than cranial capacity and more abruptly. Yet, was the evolution of precision grip a punctuated quick event? Moving forward, a later example of Australopithecus garhi, comes with the first known record of tool usage and a clear progression towards the modern precision grip we see later in hominids. Australopithecus garhi fossils and tools dating back to roughly 2.5 million years ago have been found. Tools known as Alduin stones were used by the species. Although precise movements were not needed for the use of these primitive rocks as tools, we can see how the selection pressure for tool use for hunting would select for more precise hand movements. In addition, Australopithecus garhi has again an enlarged cranial capacity at 450 centimeters squared. By the time we see the first known ancestors of the genus Homo, significant differences have arisen. Early Homo habilis, for example, had a cranial capacity that was a large jump from the earlier Australopithecine ancestor at 750 centimeters cubed. In addition, Homo habilis, dating back to 1.9 to 1.7 billion years ago and known as the handy man, had a hand in morphology that starts to show a transition to modern hominid hands. Homo habilis had shortened hands that were somewhat transitional between the curved ancestral fingers used for knuckle walking and tree climbing and modern straight finger bones. Comparative anatomy of fossils with human hands show a similar capacity for precision
in the
grip.
ballpark of modern humans. Homo erectus were known to use a new classification of tools, known as Mouserian tools, with a much more precise tip, corresponding to an ability to have much more precise hand movements. Fossil and bone fragment findings indicate that habilis were a small game hunter, consistent with the transition of diet that we see throughout the lineage. Now, this information all sounds good, but what do we still not understand? For starters, you've probably noticed that most of the evidence previously stated comes from the fossil record directly. Modern genetic and molecular data has shown that, in many cases, the fossil record can show a different picture with missing links. After all, discrete fossil evidence is good, but scientists must make some really big extrapolations in order to create a lineage. In fact, it is much more likely that a transitional species of late Australopithecus is the common ancestral link between the genus Homo and our closest living relative Pan, which includes chimpanzees. Now, what hypotheses does this bring up? Well, the lineage of hominids is traced back to the African continent, but for such a huge surface area, Africa poses a wide variety of environments. Let's say that our last common ancestor between the Pan genus and ourselves, the Homo genus, which scientists believe lived around 6 to 7 million years ago, was an Australopithecine living in Central Africa. When plate tectonics started to dry and cool off the continent, food, water, and shelter availability drastically changed. Therefore, our Australopithecine ancestor must have been mobile enough to find a better environment. Let's say that out-pocket groups of this ancestor, in their migration to find a better niche, found different regions to settle in. These divergent groups would likely find a new selection pressure and therefore follow different evolutionary paths. New pathogens, climates, and food sources would all contribute to divergence. The genus Pan, with highly adapted hands for climbing, would find refuge in a forested region, while the group that most likely spawned our lineage found a home in the African grasslands. In these grasslands, the need for tree climbing would be mostly irrelevant, and therefore, a new mechanism for finding food and moving must have been selected for tool-making capabilities and bipedal motion. This explains why our ancestors started the process of tool-making to hunt game animals living in the open grasslands, as opposed to foraging for items in the densely packed forest. Drawn out on a phylogenetic tree, it may seem as if the genus Homo just appeared out of thin air. Yet is that really the case? In fact, data relating to cephalization patterns, or the increased cranial capacity that we just discussed, shows a somewhat gradual increase to the capacity we see in modern hominids. Yet when it comes to precision grip and hands, the evolution is less simple. Originally, scientists had trouble grappling with the discrepancies between hand morphologies and species within the Homo lineage. Yet it now appears that the evolution of the precision grip follows what scientists call a mosaic pattern, in which certain species within the lineage which appeared to look more modern in some areas would have hands that still resembled an ancestral population, and vice versa. So that's a lot of information, but what is the take-home message? Well, given the fossil evidence we have, scientists have been able to successfully piece together what they believe to be the most plausible lineage for the genus Homo, originating from a most likely transitional ancestor to the genus Australopithecus. New ecological niches due to migration with climate change most likely selected for derived characters we see today, specifically a precision grip and an enlarged brain capacity to understand complex maneuvers of tools for jobs such as hunting. There's still a lot more clues to find and many more holes to be filled, yet the ability of our new age of modern science allows us to take genetic material from something as small as a patch of skin to provide a molecular clock that helps piece together the timeline of evolution. Fossil evidence has given us the framework from which we are able to sketch the skeletal evolution of our genus, and from that we fill in the blanks.
Braun, you better believe it, and I'm loaded with both.
Will you listen?
Oh, yeah.
Now, while you create a disturbance,
I want to be like you. I want to walk like you, talk like you.